Have I been making straw man arguments? Hey, I'm Jordan for Bible and Archaeology. This is exactly what Christopher Eames of the Armstrong Institute says that I've been up to in a new article they put out titled, Is Joshua Mentioned in the Amarna Letters? Now, we're not going to go through their whole article. They are talking about a specific reference to an individual that they want to associate with Joshua that is mentioned in EA 256. Now, the identification of this name as even being Joshua is something that not everyone agrees with. Is this a fair translation? Is this a translation that pushes it towards the biblical text? This is something that we talked about with Eric Cline in our interview about his new book, Love, War, and Diplomacy, talking about the Amarna Letters. That type of association between names in the Amarna Letters and biblical characters is something that was very common in early scholarship, but many scholars have moved away from. What I want to focus on most, though, in not agreeing with that identification, but knowing that we have conversations elsewhere, is what they said about our video responding to Joel Kramer from Expedition Bible in his argument about the Habiru. Now, in that video, we went through sections of Joel Kramer's argument that the Habiru from the Amarna Letters are the ancient Israelites, that you should understand the Habiru of the Amarna Letters as the Hebrews. And I disagree. And a wide number of scholars disagree with that identification. It's something that's built on an etymological argument that was put forward early that many have moved away from. It's something that sounds good to your ear, sure, but that doesn't mean that that connection is actually there when we get behind what it sounds like and look at the linguistic connections, right? If we quote Christopher Eames here, a name strikingly reminiscent of the word Hebrew. Yeah, it is strikingly reminiscent if you do Habiru to Hebrew, but another way you can transliterate Habiru is Apiru. And then that doesn't sound the same. So then if it doesn't have that same kind of striking reminiscence, is it not the same thing? So just the etymology itself isn't a reason to say this is a solid identification. We included an article in the last video, I'll put it down below again, from Brian Doak, Some Worthless and Reckless Fellows, that this identification shouldn't just be a reason that you build everything on to say the Habiru are the Hebrews. We'll have a link to that down in the description. But I want to turn to some of what they said about our video because I don't think that the straw men they're wanting to see are there. So they said about our video that we followed onto Joel Kramer's video with the response, that opinion in the comments was split, which is fair, and that while disagreeing with some elements of Kramer's presentation, I think such rebuttals from Jones and others fall into the trap of straw manning, ridiculing the notion that all Habiru are Israelites, instead of engaging with the real argument that the biblical term Hebrew is cognate with Habiru, and that while the conquest period Israelites can be identified as Habiru-Hebrews, not all Habiru-Hebrews were necessarily Israelites. Okay, so again, here, I do not agree, and a number of scholars do not agree that Hebrew is cognate to Habiru. I'd also push back, though, that I'm straw-manning Joel Kramer, because in not addressing this all are or some are or we only want some at some points, I was going through what Joel Kramer's argument was, which is...
And despite all this, the majority view of scholars today is that the Habiru of the Amarna Letters are not the Hebrew Israelites of the Bible. But if you think about it, who else could they be?
What is obvious, according to the evidence itself, is that these letters are referring to the Hebrew Israelites. That's who the Habiru are.
So I'm responding to that claim, not to Christopher's claim that sometimes the Habiru are the Hebrew Israelites and sometimes they're not, which is a different argument we can get into here in a second. So I think if you think there are straw man arguments in my video, it's because Joel Kramer was putting forward straw man arguments in their identification. And what you don't see in this is, well, what disagreements do you have with Joel Kramer? Why don't you get into that part? You don't, because you agree with the broader identification they have, so you don't want to nitpick anything that he might have said there. So when you're saying I'm straw manning things, be careful of the thing that you yourself are building here. Now again, the connection between Habiru and Hebrew as a cognate word is not something that there is wide agreement on. There are still scholars who think this is a connection. There are a large number of scholars who do not. Anson Rainey, we'll put some links down below, has talked about this extensively as a linguistic connection that simply doesn't bear out. Furthermore, they talk about a reference that I made to references to the Habiru in texts from the 19th or 18th century all the way to the 12th century, and that if you want to identify the Habiru as the Hebrews, you need to deal with all of that. Well, their argument, Christopher's argument, is that not all Habiru are the Hebrews of the Hebrew Bible, just sometimes. Okay, question then for you. How do you decide which some are the ones that you want and which ones are the ones that you don't? Is it just when it's convenient because it lines up with the biblical text that you have? And maybe this is Joshua and maybe the Amarna Letters fit, and so those can be ours? And this one over here maybe sounds like it could connect with Abram by timeline, so that one will be ours? But these others from Nunzi that describe people selling themselves into servitude for food, we won't claim those ones. Or these from up in Syria, or these from Anatolia. Which ones do you want and which ones don't you want? As you're saying, sometimes it might be the ones that we want and sometimes it isn't. How do you go about distinguishing that? You're going to say that the ones in the Amarna Letters are the ones that you want, but even that is not so clean because not all Habiru in the Amarna Letters are functioning in the same way. Sometimes they are that band of mercenaries on the outside of the city-state system, and sometimes they're inside the city-state system. So that's not a unified term, which is why we said Habiru is not an ethnic distinction. It's a social class. Now, yes, the Habiru do show the type of social situation out of which the Hebrew Bible's conquest story could emerge. That doesn't mean that the people we see identified as the Habiru need to be the same. Is it the grounds from which this type of internal formation can happen? Yes. Does it mean it must be one-to-one? No. Identifying that individual name to a people you want from another text gets very difficult because if you're saying sometimes it's what I want and sometimes it isn't, how are you sorting those? How are you distinguishing? Is it just what fits your fancy? Is there a criteria? Is it chronological? Is it geographical? If so, on what grounds? How are you going about doing that if sometimes they might be and sometimes they aren't? So Christopher, I don't think I was building a straw man. I do think that you are putting forward some straw man arguments yourself in your identification of Joshua as someone in the Amarna Letters, or in the criticism of my criticism of Joel. If you want to see more, I will link our response to Joel Kramer here. I will also include a link to our interview with Eric Cline talking more about the Amarna Letters and their broader context here. If you have other questions about this, send them our way, but for now, we'll leave it there.